The steel and glass towers of Atlas Corp pierced the Los Angeles skyline, glittering under the afternoon sun. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the familiar hum of ambition and tension. Workers moved in a constant stream through the hallways, balancing paperwork and deadlines with caffeine-fueled fervor. At the top of the building, the CEO, Ryan Mercer, stood with his back to the room, gazing through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. To him, they were nothing more than ants, a network of insignificant lives beneath his corporate empire. Ryan, in his early 50s, was a sharp-featured man with a steel-gray beard and the cold, piercing eyes of someone who thrived in a world of cutthroat competition. His meticulously tailored suits were a testament to his wealth and power, his very presence dominating any room he entered. A knock on the door shattered his thoughts. "Come in," he barked, without turning. His assistant, Lauren, a slender woman in her early 30s, entered cautiously. "Mr. Mercer, the quarterly review with the board is about to begin." Ryan barely acknowledged her. "Tell them I'll be there in 5. And make sure the financials from accounts are perfect this time. No more excuses." Lauren nodded quickly and slipped out, leaving Ryan alone in the quiet tension of his office. He ran a hand through his silvered hair, adjusting his tie, and made his way to the boardroom. The executives seated around the table straightened up as Ryan strode in, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. He took his seat at the head of the table, and without preamble he began, "Our profits are up by 8%, but that's not enough. I want to see a 20% increase by next quarter. I don't care what you have to do, fire deadweight, slash costs, double productivity, just get it done." The meeting proceeded in the same clipped tone for over an hour, Ryan dismissing concerns and shooting down suggestions with ruthless efficiency. By the end, the executives shuffled out of the room, drained and defeated. On his way back to his office, Ryan barely registered the presence of the janitors beginning their evening shift. To him, they were part of the building, faceless and interchangeable. One of them, however, wasn't as invisible as Ryan thought. John Mallory, in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face, pushed his cleaning cart down the hall with precision and purpose. His uniform was spotless, his movements efficient and methodical. John had been working at Atlas Corp for nearly 3 years, cleaning offices and emptying trash bins without fuss or fanfare. The daytime staff barely noticed him, and that was just fine with John. As he cleaned, he overheard hushed conversations from employees, the same tired refrains of impossible deadlines, burnout, and the ever-present fear of layoffs. John moved silently through the building, his eyes sharp and observant, noting every detail. Though his face remained calm, his military training never left him. Years in special forces had taught him to listen, to assess, and to prepare. The company's annual gala was approaching, and the pressure inside Atlas was reaching a breaking point. Ryan pushed his employees harder than ever, while tension simmered beneath the surface. For most of the staff, the gala was a reprieve, a chance to rub shoulders with clients and maybe secure some relief from the corporate grind. For John, it was just another shift, this time as part of the catering crew hired for the event. The gala was held at a high-end venue downtown. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light across the room, and the attendees sipped champagne while mingling in their designer suits and dresses. Ryan Mercer stood at the center, charming clients and VIPs, but the charm wore thin as the night went on. After a few too many drinks, his true nature began to show. John watched quietly as Ryan berated a young waiter for accidentally spilling a drink. The CEO's face twisted with irritation, leaving the waiter close to tears. John's grip tightened slightly on the tray of hors d'oeuvres he carried, but he said nothing, keeping his distance. Later that evening, fate forced the two men into confrontation. As John navigated the packed ballroom, someone bumped him from behind, and he stumbled forward. His tray, laden with red wine, tilted. The rich liquid splashed across Ryan Mercer's pristine white shirt and jacket. A hush fell over the room as Ryan's eyes blazed with fury. "You clumsy fool!" Ryan shouted, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? It's probably worth more than you'll make in a year." John straightened, his face calm but eyes locked on Ryan. "I apologize, sir. It was an accident." Ryan wasn't listening. Emboldened by the alcohol coursing through his veins, he sneered, "You're fired. I don't want to see your face in my building ever again." The room was dead silent. John nodded once. "I understand. I'll collect my things." Ryan stormed off to deal with his stained suit, while John quietly left the ballroom. His face remained impassive, but inside, a storm was brewing. As John collected his things the next day, his exit went mostly unnoticed. The exception was Mara Turner, head of HR. She approached John, her voice quiet with sympathy. "John, I'm so sorry about what happened. You didn't deserve that. If there's anything I can do." John shook his head, offering her a small smile. "No need, Mara. This is how it goes sometimes. I've seen worse." Mara hesitated, sensing something deeper in his words, but she didn't press. As John left the building, he knew that part of his life had ended, but he was prepared for whatever came next. A few weeks later, Atlas Corp found itself facing a very different kind of crisis. It started with a string of threatening letters, followed by sightings of strange men lurking near the building. Ryan dismissed the threats as amateur attempts to rattle him, but the danger was all too real. The man behind the threats, Victor Stryker, was a ruthless crime lord with a plan to use Atlas Corp as a front for a massive money laundering operation. Victor's crew was well-trained, organized, and highly dangerous, ex-military, much like John. Their plan culminated on a cold Friday evening, when they stormed Atlas Corp's headquarters, armed to the teeth. Employees screamed as the intruders took control, locking down the building and cutting off communication with the outside world. Ryan, furious and terrified, was taken to his office, where Victor himself awaited. "Mr. Mercer," Victor said smoothly, sitting in Ryan's chair, "you should have taken my threats more seriously." Ryan, now a captive in his own empire, felt a surge of panic. As the realization of his situation sank in, he knew he was in over his head. Elsewhere in the city, John Mallory was quietly enjoying a peaceful evening when his phone buzzed. It was Mara, her voice frantic. "John, I don't know why, but I felt I had to call you. Atlas Corp. We're being held hostage. Please, I don't know who else to." John's demeanor shifted instantly. "Stay calm. I'm on my way." Within minutes, John was en route to the Atlas building. His mind was already formulating a plan. The years he'd spent in special forces had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. And now, it was time to put those skills to use once again. John Mallory approached the gleaming towers of Atlas Corp from a distance, his eyes scanning the scene. The police had already set up barricades, and the media vans were lining the streets, their cameras trained on the building. He parked a block away, blending into the shadows as he assessed the situation. Years of special forces training kicked in instinctively. He knew this wasn't just a simple hostage situation. These men were professionals, and they had a clear objective. He made his way toward the rear of the building, sticking to the shadows to avoid detection. At the service entrance, he found a lone guard, one of Victor's men. With a swift, silent move, John disabled him, leaving the guard unconscious behind a dumpster. He entered the building through the service door, slipping into the quiet corridors with practiced ease. The familiar hallways brought back memories of his time as the janitor. He had walked these floors countless times, unnoticed by everyone. Now, those same corridors became his battleground. He moved swiftly and silently, avoiding the main areas where the intruders had gathered the hostages. As he made his way deeper into the building, his mind raced, assessing the situation and formulating a plan. Inside the main office, Victor was growing increasingly impatient. His plan had been precise, down to the last detail. Take control of Atlas Corp, force Ryan Mercer to comply, and set up the perfect front for his criminal operations. But something was wrong. His men were starting to disappear. One by one, they lost contact with each other, and Victor's calm, controlled demeanor began to crack. "What do you mean we've lost contact with Johnson and Davis?" Victor growled into his radio. "Find them." The man on the other end of the radio was nervous. "We're looking, but we're spread thin. There's no sign of them." Victor slammed his fist on the desk, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't some random disappearance. There was something or someone in the building, and they were systematically dismantling his operation. His gaze shifted to Ryan, tied to a chair across the room, his face pale with fear. "Looks like you've got some kind of guardian angel, Mercer," Victor said with a sneer. "But it won't matter. No one's coming to save you." Ryan remained silent, fear tightening his throat. He had never felt more helpless in his life. John moved through the building like a shadow, taking down the guards one by one with surgical precision. In a storage room, he found a small armory of equipment, Nothing fancy, just a few tactical tools that would help him finish the job. His senses were heightened, every noise and movement in the building feeding into his tactical awareness. He knew he had to reach the hostages and neutralize the remaining men without raising the alarm. He made his way to the security room, where he accessed the camera feeds. The sight before him confirmed his worst fears. Victor's men had the entire building on lockdown, and they were heavily armed. The hostages were divided into groups, each guarded by armed men, while Victor himself had taken Ryan to his office on the top floor. John's jaw clenched. This would be no easy rescue. John set his plan into motion. He knew Victor's men were ex-military, well-trained and disciplined. But they didn't know what was coming for them. Using the building's layout to his advantage, John created diversions, forcing the men to scatter, isolating them. With each takedown, John moved closer to the hostages. On the third floor, he encountered a group of employees huddled together in a conference room, their captors patrolling nearby. John waited for the perfect moment, then moved in. The guards didn't even see him coming. Within seconds, both men were down, and John was guiding the employees to a safer location. "Stay here," John whispered, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'll come back for you when it's safe." Among the employees was Mara Turner, her face pale but resolute. She looked at John with a mix of relief and awe. "John, I had no idea." "There's a lot you didn't know," John replied with a tight smile. "But we'll talk later. Right now, I need to finish this." Victor paced the office, his frustration mounting. His radio crackled again, another report of missing men. He spun toward Ryan, his face twisted with rage. "Who did you call? Who's in the building?" Ryan shook his head, genuinely clueless. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Victor snapped, grabbing Ryan by the collar. "You think you're clever, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, Mercer. Your luck is about to run out." Before Victor could continue, a deafening crash echoed through the office door. The door burst open, and John Mallory stood in the doorway, his eyes locked on Victor. For a moment, the room fell into complete silence, as if the air itself had frozen in anticipation. Victor's face twisted into a sneer. "So you're the one causing all this trouble? A janitor, huh? You should have stayed in your lane, pal." John didn't flinch. "Let Ryan go. This ends now." Victor laughed, pulling a gun from his waistband. "You really think you can take me down? You don't know who you're dealing with." John's eyes narrowed. "Actually, I do." The fight that followed was brutal, a collision of two trained men, both hardened by years of combat experience. Victor fought dirty, using every underhanded trick in the book. But John was faster, more precise. His movements were a blur of calculated strikes and expert disarms, honed through years of special forces missions. Victor swung wildly, his anger clouding his judgment. John dodged the blows effortlessly, countering with devastating precision. In a matter of seconds, he had disarmed Victor, pinning him to the ground. Victor struggled, but it was futile. John tightened his grip on Victor's arm, forcing him to stop struggling. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're done." Victor looked up at John, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Who are you?" John didn't answer. Instead, he zip-tied Victor's wrists and stood up, turning to Ryan. He quickly untied the CEO, who stared at John with a mixture of gratitude and shock. "John, I don't understand. How did you?" "There's no time for that now," John said, cutting him off. "We need to get everyone out." As the police moved in, taking Victor and his men into custody, the hostages emerged, shaken but unharmed. The media swarmed the scene, eager to report on the heroic rescue. But John, true to his nature, stayed in the background, avoiding the cameras and slipping away before the spotlight could find him. Ryan Mercer stood on the steps of the building, watching John disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of humility. John had saved them all, without asking for recognition or reward. Mara approached Ryan, her voice soft. "He's incredible, isn't he?" Ryan nodded, still staring at the spot where John had been. "More than I ever realized. I owe him everything." The sun was beginning to rise as John Mallory walked down the quiet streets of Los Angeles, the city waking up to a new day. He had left the corporate world behind, but his purpose was clear. There were always new challenges ahead, And while he might not know exactly where the road would lead, one thing was certain: he was ready for whatever came next. In the distance, the Atlas Corp Tower stood tall, a monument to power, success, and now redemption. And somewhere in the shadows, the man who had saved it all was walking away, quietly, as he always had.